I'm Linda Shire from the Acton Wakefield Watersheds Alliance. Many of you know me, and vice versa. Just a little background, we're here today for our fourth water talk of the season, and we partnered with the Acton Public Library. Lisa Miller is their librarian over there, and the Gaffney Library in Wakefield. Their librarian is Barry Donovan, who I think we'll see at some point. It's been a really fun partnership. We've had talks about the American bald eagle, the American eel. If you missed that one, you missed my favorite. Loon Preservation Committee talking about loons, and today we have Don Kretschmer talking about how we keep our lakes healthy. Our job here in Acton and Wakefield is to help keep the lakes healthy. We do pollution prevention through a variety of projects. We do outreach and education through lake associations and the schools and through the municipalities. We have a Youth Conservation Corps. Amy Arsenault back here runs our Youth Conservation Corps, working with shorefront property owners to reduce runoff and pollution that reaches the lake. So if anybody knows anybody who could use a little technical assistance, Amy comes out for free, meets with the homeowner, finds out how they use their property, and then comes up with solutions to make the property a little more lake friendly. So have anybody you know or yourselves get in touch with Amy if you'd like any help this year. We are having our first AWA Water Fair on Saturday, July 28th in Turntable Park in Sanbornville. It's a fun 10 to 2 way to bring together all the different groups that are working to protect water quality throughout our region, the lake associations and AWA, and for a fun day to do educational and fun things for families around water, including being able to dunk our YCC kids into a dunk tank. So should be a lot of fun. We're always looking for volunteers, so if you have any interest in getting involved at all, finding a little bit more about us, let us know. Amy, was that? So with that, I will pass it on to Don, who is working on Province Lake right now with the Province Lake Association, trying to help figure out how to make a bad lake go good, maybe?
That's
not
right.
Bad lake. It's
not bad lake, yeah.
But anyway, take it away, Don.
Thank you, Linda, and thanks for having me. Before we get started, how many of you have heard me give a talk before? Okay, only a couple. Good, because I apologize, there'll be a couple slides that people have seen before, but that's good. It's mostly a new audience. There's a lot of stuff that nobody has seen before because they just generated it in the last couple days. Some of the things. In fact, that picture is Province Lake from yesterday. It's a nice windy day. I was over there meeting with the Province Lake folks. And one of the questions we're trying to answer over at Province Lake is whether or not some of the sediments are resuspended in big wind events, and whether when they resuspend, some of the phosphorus comes back into the water column. So that's a question that the Province Lakes folks are working on this summer. So I was trying to come up with a catchy title. I think this is probably a good one. What makes good lakes go bad? I've been working on lakes for 30-something years. I've probably worked on maybe 100, 150 lakes in New Hampshire. The good news is most of them are pretty good, but some of them aren't. And there's reasons why they aren't, and they're not always the same reason. But there are some commonalities that I'll try to touch on. So today's topics, what's good and what's bad? What makes lakes go bad? I've got some data from last year from the AWA lakes that I'll share with you. What can be done? When a lake is good and you want to keep it good, what can be done? What can be done if a lake is going bad and you need to fix it? And then I'm going to leave a lot of time for questions because there's usually lots of questions. So, regional water quality. We're fortunate. We live in a lakes region. How you define it, it is not defined by boundaries. And you guys cross the boundary into Maine. The lakes region of New Hampshire is continuous with the lakes region of Maine. And we're very, very fortunate that we have great water quality. Most of our lakes are in pretty good shape. It's the cornerstone of our tourist-based economy. Without the lakes, this probably wouldn't be that desirable place to live. It's rural, it's rocky, you can't grow anything here really except for trees and rocks. If there weren't lakes here, there wouldn't be a lot of people here probably. The desirability of living in this area is related to high-quality water resources. That's why people come here. And if you'll notice, a lot of the people that come here come from parts of the country where the water quality isn't very good. They say, I'm not going to vacation on these lakes here. I'm going up to New Hampshire, I'm going up to Maine. Those lakes are really nice. And that's our selling, that's the golden goose for us in this area. So what's going on now in our lakes? You know, we have decent water quality data sets. Thankfully, we have a couple of really good monitoring programs in the statewide. And we also have really good monitoring on a bunch of the individual lakes. And that's really, really helpful. I can't stress enough how helpful it is to actually have data to look at. I'll often get called out, you know, in other parts of the country, they'll say, well, we got an algal bloom. I say, well, what kind of data do you have, you know, from historically to let us know whether or not this is something that's, well, we don't really have any data. It's like, well, it's really hard to figure out where, you know, where you're going to and where you are if you don't know where you've been. And we're very fortunate that most of the lakes in the Lakes region, not all of them, but most of them have pretty good data, and most of that data is collected by volunteers. Our watersheds have been changing for years. And I'm going to show a few slides about the way back history, and then I'll show some, you know, some examples of what's been happening in terms of development in recent years. And this is sort of like the next wave of deforestation is we're kind of in it now, where our watersheds are getting developed into house lots rather than cut up into logs. Species are changing. I'll show a little bit of data on some of the fish species and how they've changed over the years. We obviously have invasive species of plants in the lakes. We have Chinese mystery snails. I don't know if anyone has seen them in their lakes. They seem to be more and more prevalent. Ecologically, we don't know exactly what the story is with them, but that is some questions that are being answered, or being asked and researched at least. We also have warmer summer conditions and warmer winter conditions. And how's that changing, you know, sort of where we're at in terms of our lakes? So what's good and what is bad? And a lot of that is a matter of perspective. What's good for one person might be bad for another. There are a few bad things that we kind of agree on. I think we all agree that cyanobacteria blooms are probably bad. A lake filled with milfoil, probably bad. But there's a lot of things in between there, and you can't always tell just by looking at a lake. So this is two different lakes, and these lakes have two very, very different stories. On the left is Sondargarty Pond over in Northfield, New Hampshire. Shallow, frequent cyanobacteria blooms in summer. Really not a pleasant place, often have beach advisories, often can't swim. Next door to that is Lake Wentworth, the watershed that I live in, and low nutrient, clear water, supports trout. But if you look at the two pictures, they look virtually identical. And it isn't until you actually look at the data, you know, to really know sort of what the difference is between those. So that's why the data is so critically important.
Could you tell us what cyanobacteria?
Oh, sorry, cyanobacteria, right. Anytime there's some jargon that you don't know, shout it out, and I'll do my best. So, blue-green algae are cyanobacteria. We used to call them blue-green algae. We used to call them a species of algae, but it turns out they have characteristics of algae and characteristics of bacteria. They're kind of an in-between thing. They form floating scums. I'll talk a little bit about it coming up, but they're blue-green algae is what we used to call them. So, clear lakes. I mean, we can all agree that this is probably good, right? These are good lakes, and I think you'd be right. Both of these are really, really clear and you know, pristine-looking lakes, have fish, and everyone's happy there. Not so clear. A couple lakes that I've worked on. This one is from space. Is Lake Mendota out in Wisconsin. I went to grad school there. On the shore of the lake, there's an algal bloom there, and this is up on Lake Champlain. An algal bloom there, and you know, it isn't at that consistency all over the lake, but this is where it blew into shore. Pretty nasty, and this is cyanobacteria. It's likely toxic. Not a great situation in this particular bay of Lake Champlain. Not all of Lake Champlain is like that, but there are certain bays that are. So nutrients and invasive plants.
Is there anything they can do about that? I mean, can you like scoop it up and throw it away, or?
You could, but it's kind of like, pushing a rock uphill. I mean, it would be so costly. I mean, you can remove it if you don't like it right in front of your place, but I think it would be an endless task. So I'm going to talk about sort of what you would do to sort of prevent that from happening, but that's a good question. So this is a pond down on the border of Massachusetts. Used to be a pond, it looks more like a wetland now, completely filled with plants and invasive plants. And this is milfoil in Back Bay over in Wolfboro. At times it has pretty much taken over much of Back Bay, so the uses are pretty difficult. So I think we can agree both of those are probably on the bad side of the spectrum. So good. These guys went out and caught a few fish, right? So in their mind, hey, water quality is great, everything's good, the lake is good. But what about the day that they didn't catch anything? For them, oh man, that's a bad lake, I'm not going there anymore, there's no fish in it. And my grandfather used to always tell a story, he'd always say, I don't ever remember any bad fishing days when I was a kid. And I said, really? He goes, no, we never took pictures of empty stringers. We only took pictures when we had fish. I'm sure we had bad fishing days, but I don't remember them. I only remember from the pictures I took, which was when we caught fish. So in his mind, he said, in my mind, we always caught fish. He said, may or may not be true, but anyway, how your fishing luck is, may determine whether you think a lake is good or bad. So sometimes when you change the fish community in a lake, so this is a lake I worked on up in northern Michigan, split in half by this road. This is Peter Lake, this is Paul Lake, virtually identical water quality. We changed the fish community, and one of them turned green. And we didn't do anything else but change the fish community. So this had bass in it, and we took the bass out and put minnows in it, and had an unbalanced fish community. And because of that, and I'll explain that in a little bit, it turned green. And we did nothing to this side, and it kind of stayed the same. So there's things that are happening below the surface that you may or may not, that will help explain what you see for water quality. So it might be good, it might be bad. Lakefront development. So if you're inside one of these houses, looking out, you might think, wow, this is really good. What a great view. Everything's nice. But if you're out on the lake, looking in, you might say, wow, that's kind of a big footprint on the landscape. And if you're, a particle of phosphorus that wants to run into the lake, you might say, wow, this is great. I got a straight shot into the lake. So, roadways. We have a lot of roadways along our lakes. It seemed to be the easiest place to make roads back in the day. When you're driving around the state and you're driving along a lake, you think, wow, this is great. What a great view. This is great. Look at that beautiful lake out there. When you're out on the lake and see a highway running over the top of it, this is Stevens Pond down in Manchester. This is Lake Winona up in Meredith. You realize that, well, where's the runoff from this road going? Right off the edge into the lake. Where's the runoff from this road going? Right off the edge into the lake. So that's probably bad from a lake's perspective. Great from a view perspective, but bad from the lake's perspective. So is this good or bad? It's a value judgment. It's something we wrestle with. If you're out in this raft and having a good time, you might think, wow, this is great. What a great lake this is. This is Lake Winnisquam. This is Lake Wentworth back in the day. But if you're on, if this is right in front of your house, you might think, wow, that's really not great. I mean, these people have been out there all day. There's no bathrooms on these boats. There's issues. So, again, a matter of perspective. So this is a postcard that I love. I mean, this was the future of Lake Winnipesaukee as predicted in 1910. And I'll guarantee that almost everything in this picture is on Lake Winnipesaukee on a busy day, with the exception of maybe the submarine and the whale. But everything else is pretty much there. This is what it looks like. Speedboats and sailboats and the Mount Washington coming in, and it's just there's a lot. I mean, whoever came up with that picture was, he could see the future, or she could see the future. So I'm going to go through a couple slides of what determines water quality in our lakes. And that'll kick off kind of the discussion of what we might do about it. So history, what's happened in the past, really critical to what our lakes look like now. And it could be very past, very long ago history, which I'll show a couple slides. I mean, one of the issues is, I hear all the time, boy, it's not as good a water quality as when I was a kid. But a lot of us aren't old enough to remember back when there was no trees in the watersheds in New Hampshire. And back then, I bet the water quality wasn't very good. But we'll talk about that in a second. Water chemistry, I'm going to talk only a very little bit about that, but that's what the monitoring is about. Size of the watershed matters. Big watersheds are a little more difficult to control. If you've got sources that are way away from the lake, it's really hard to convince those people who live up there to care about the lake, which they may not even see and may never visit. That what they're doing on their land affects the lake way downstream. One of the things that I like to use as sort of a point of discussion with folks who live there is a lot of the things that you would do on your property to protect your own well, which almost everybody in this area is on their own groundwater well, are the same kind of things you would do to protect the lake. The depth and the volume of the lake makes a difference. Activities on the land, we just talked about that a little bit. The geology, fortunately around here we have, and I say fortunately for our lakes, our soils are pretty poor. And that's the reason that everyone gave up farming. There's really not much it's sand, it's rock. It grows great trees, but that's about it. And as soon as people realize there's land out west that doesn't have rocks, and it's flat, it's like, I'm going out there farming. And so we're fortunate that this isn't sort of the agricultural belt with fertile, deep soils. At least our lakes are fortunate. It makes our lakes, a lot more pristine. The aquatic community, I talked a little bit about that. Weather and the climate makes a difference. And then there's, big events, floods, fires, drought, wind. All those things affect our watersheds. And there's a couple of examples in New Hampshire of things that have had a profound impact over a period of years after they've happened. So history matters. This is not me, but this is how they used to go out and sample lakes. This is Burge and Judea. These are a couple of guys that were kind of the fathers of limnology or lake science. And I don't often wear a tie when I'm out sampling, but I suppose I could step it up a little bit. That's how they used to go out sampling. I always like to say the lakes remember much longer than we do. The water quality in the lake is a reflection of things that have happened in the far past. All of what's happened in the far past is in the sediments. There are conditions where what happened in the far past that's in the sediments comes back into the water column and revisits. It's the ghosts of loadings past. I think I was talking about that yesterday a little bit. So the lakes remember a lot longer than we do. They've been around since the last glaciers, about 10,000, 12,000 years ago. History often repeats itself. We can often learn if we have a bloom or have a bad water quality episode. There's a good chance it will happen again if the conditions are the same. So we can learn from that. So this is just a general history of kind of our lakes in this area. So all of them were underneath glaciers back in the last glaciation. We're up in here right now. So we were all covered by ice. There were no lakes. They were all frozen underneath, anywhere from a couple hundred feet to half a mile of ice. And that's how they were formed. So we started off with kind of a clean slate when the glaciers went away. And then not a lot happened for about 9,000 years, maybe more. And then people came. And then things started to happen. There were some Native American settlements around their lakes, but there was no wide-scale clearing. I'm sure there was an occasional windstorm, there was an occasional fire, but for the most part, it was all forested. Water quality was probably pretty good. So then we had logging for mast and lumber. We had a lot of white pines around here, big white pines. They were all reserved for the king to make masts for ships, and pretty much all of New Hampshire was logged. and they threw the logs in the nearest water body, which was usually our lakes. And these are just a couple of shots of our lakes filled with logs. If you look at our old growth forests, so these were the forests that were here before the settlers from the Europeans came. I mean, we were pretty much continuous forest in our part of the world. And if you look over time at how that has been cut, there's virtually no old growth forest yet. So pretty much all of New England has been cut at one time or another, and many of them at least twice, many areas. So 1810 to 1840, New Hampshire was the wool capital of the world. After that logging, they brought sheep in. And this is kind of what our watersheds look like. What's woods now was sheep pasture. In the hillsides, you know, all of the hillsides, I mean, sheep are pretty amazing grazers. They can graze on just about anything. 80% of New Hampshire south of the White Mountains was cleared. Maine was very similar. There was more sheep than people, like 3 times as many sheep than people in New Hampshire. By the 1840s, people moved west. The sheep had kind of overgrazed everything. Grass wasn't growing very well. There was places above rocks. So people moved and the forest started to grow back. And we see that in our landscape. In all of our watersheds, we have these stone walls left over from the farms of that era, with big trees around them. And it's hard to believe that that was a pasture at one time, but it was. You know, many of these areas, you know, even these giant trees, these are probably only 50 or 60 years old. So we had a second logging. Everything grew back. We had a second logging around 1890 to 1905. This was pretty significant. Again, pretty much all of New Hampshire and a lot of Maine was cleared. These are just some views, like this is in the Sandwich area. These are up in the White Mountains. This was a big fire up in the Pemigewasset wilderness up near Lincoln, where they had cut down the trees and left all the tops and the branches dried out. Enormous fire. I mean, you can imagine in terms of water quality what this would do to a lake down at the bottom of the hill. It probably wasn't so great, but none of us are old enough to remember. So this is a typical scene. This is a postcard from Wolfboro on looking down on Lake Wentworth. Well, the important thing about this is the early 1900s. I know where this spot is on this road, and there's no way you can see the lake now. I mean, it's all trees. This is all big trees. It's all gone back to forest, and that's been really helped our water quality. This one will be a little hard to see, but this is just basically the path of the hurricane of 38. And it's estimated that like 25% of the trees in New Hampshire were knocked down by the hurricane of 38. And the darker areas had more trees knocked down, and the lighter areas a little less, but it certainly takes over this Acton-Wakefield area. There was a lot of trees that dropped. And we had a lot of other weather events over the years. I mean, there was hurricanes. They weren't named back in the day, but in the 1800s, all the way up to 2011, Hurricane Irene. And then we have low lake levels at various periods. We had Hurricane of 38, other ice, wind, rainstorms. I mean, lots of things have happened in our watersheds that affected water quality historically. And these are just some pictures of historic low water levels. I've never seen this low. And I know this is part of Lake Wentworth. Never seen it quite that low. I mean, this is probably down 8 or 10 feet. And this is just from a normal drought back in, this was 1987, I think. And high water level. This is a dock. They try to keep it from floating away. But what happens when you have high water levels sometimes is septic systems get flooded, like this one here. You get erosion along the shoreline. You get mass slumping of banks. All those things can happen during high water. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about, so that's kind of the history part of it. I'm going to talk a little bit about phosphorus, so this is kind of the water chemistry part. So if you have to remember one piece of chemistry out of all this, is phosphorus is in it. So it's the most important nutrient in lakes. Typically in our lakes, the amount of phosphorus is directly related to how green the lake is. And that green can come in the form of algae, it can come in the form of plants. But phosphorus is typically the most important one. It's also kind of the easiest one to control. So it's one that we can actually do something about. Nitrogen's a little harder. It's important. Nitrogen is really important when you get down to the ocean. So we're worried about nitrogen as well, but phosphorus for our lakes is the critical thing. And it's the middle number in a bag of fertilizer. There's three numbers, 16, 4, 8. 4 is the amount of phosphorus. I would argue very strongly that that number should be 0 if you live in any freshwater watershed. We have a lot of natural phosphorus in our soils. You don't need extra phosphorus. The same things that make your lawn green will make the lake green. And there's no point in doing it. I mean, and that, you know, if you want to use sort of more of a natural landscape argument, you didn't move up here to cut grass, or live up here to cut grass. You want to be out on the lake, so why make the grass grow faster? Or why even have, have all that lawn? So this is just sort of our general sources of, where phosphorus comes in. I mean, I have some specific ones as well. A certain amount of phosphorus comes in through atmospheric deposition, and that happens with rainfall. And it's related to dust, it's related to emissions out in the Midwest. We can't do a lot about that globally or even nationally in terms of our own particular lake, except, I'll make one pitch against sort of the cleaning the driveway or cleaning the parking lot with a leaf blower sort of phenomenon that I see more and more. I mean, when you clear up a bunch of soil with a leaf blower, you're creating clouds of dust. And I'm sure we've all seen that, right? I mean, someone cleaning out a parking lot, clouds of dust. And that dust ends up somewhere, and a lot of times it ends up in our lakes or on a hard surface that then runs off into the lake. So I guess I would, use them carefully if you have to use them at all. But those clouds end up in the lake in atmospheric deposition. We have some natural sources. There's a little bit of phosphorus that comes out of our natural woodlands. That's okay. If the woodlands are left kind of intact, we usually end up with pretty good water quality in our lakes. We have locally controlled sources. This is kind of around everyone's house lot. These are kinds of things that you can control on your own lot. Like shoreline erosion. If you have native plants along the shoreline, no grass. Native plants tend to have deeper roots. They hold the soil better. Grass has shallow roots. Street runoff. I gave a talk in Wolfboro maybe a month ago on, and I asked the question, I've asked this at the high school a number of times, where does the water that goes in that little grate in the middle of downtown Wolfboro go? And, people look at me like, well, it goes to the treatment plant, doesn't it? It goes here, if you drop your ice cream on the, on the street and it goes down that grate, where's it go? Like, geez, I don't know, well, it goes directly into Lake Winnipesaukee, right near where people swim. And when I tell them that, they're like, well, that's disgusting. And yeah, it is, but that's the truth. And so we just need to be aware of sort of where all these things go. I mean, I have seen people changing the oil on their car over those street storm drains. Because it goes down in through that grate and it's gone, right? Well, chances are it ends up in the lake. Lawn clippings, another source of potentially of phosphorus. One of the things that we try to emphasize, if you're going to cut your lawn, you're better off leaving the clippings there, because then you don't need fertilizer. That's free fertilizer. I mean, the fertilizer companies would love to have you believe you need to fertilize 4 times a year with whatever is in those bags, but it's not true. You don't really need to. And if you leave the lawn clippings, that goes a long ways towards fertilizing it and stabilizing the soil. So fertilizer, we talked enough about that. Wastewater, so that's septic systems. And if septic systems aren't working right, they can be an important source of nutrients for lakes. There's often a little bit of pushback from people who live on lakes and they've got an old camp and they realize, oh boy, if I fix this septic system, that's going to cost a lot of money. Not to put too fine a point on it, but it's a public health hazard as well as being a lake hazard. I mean, this is raw sewage going into the lake where you and your children and your grandchildren swim. Is that really what you want? Is that worth the $7,000 or $8,000 to get a new septic system? I don't think think so. I mean, I don't think that's a trade-off you really need to make. So this is how we found out that phosphorus was important. This is a lake up in Canada where they had a lot of lakes. They had an experimental lakes area where they were able to do a lot of manipulation. This is where we learned an awful lot about how lakes work. And they put a curtain across the middle of this lake. The only difference between these two sides is that phosphorus got added to this one. And it turned green, really green. So that was one of the first indications that phosphorus was important. My daughter was here today, Mary, and I did an experiment when she was younger. And this is Lake Wentworth water. This is Lake Wentworth water with lawn fertilizer. We stuck these two in the window for 2 weeks, and this is what happened.
What was the amount of fertilizer required?
What's that?
What was the amount of fertilizer?
There was quite a bit in that one, but then we did another experiment as her chemistry got a little bit better, and we used smaller amounts of fertilizer in different amounts. So these, on this end, these are the really strong fertilizers, lots and lots of phosphorus in them. And these are low phosphorus fertilizers. And it turns out even a little bit of phosphorus in these low phosphorus fertilizers was enough to turn them green. So this is a no phosphorus fertilizer. It didn't turn green, and this one is just lake water. So even a little bit of phosphorus goes a long way. I mean, we measure phosphorus in parts per billion. Parts per billion, and 6 parts per billion is kind of a normal amount for a lake. 12 parts per billion is probably too much. So that's not a lot. That's really, really not a lot. It's a very small amount, makes a big difference. So I'm going to talk a little bit about algal groups. And I'm not going to get too far in the weeds with biology here. But these are the algal groups that we have in our lakes. And there's a seasonal succession. We get one group early in the spring, we get another group kind of in June to July, and then we get another group later, and we get a different group back in the fall. The diatoms are the first ones we see. So in May, have you ever noticed that your lake kind of has a little bit of a cloudy look to it? Not on the surface, but just in the lake. It's like, well, this is not that clear. It just kind of looks a little cloudy, and that's probably diatoms. And these guys are quite common in the spring and in the fall when the lake mixes, because they need silica, which is on the bottom. So that mixes up, and they're able to grow. Luckily for the lake, they're also very attractive to the things that eat algae. So the zooplankton chew them up. As soon as the zooplankton come out, they chew these guys right up. And then we get into this period of green algae. And after that, in a normal lake, we'll get a period where we have these blue-green algae or cyanobacteria. These are in every lake, even low-nutrient lakes. There are cyanobacteria present, typically not enough that you can even see them with the naked eye, and not enough to necessarily cause a toxicity issue. But they're there. I mean, cyanobacteria are one of the oldest organisms on Earth. So they've been around for a long time. They're pretty well adapted. But in most lakes, they're not a problem. Occasionally they are. So this is a low nutrient lake. Yep.
What is it you're seeing? It's usually in the August time frame where you see the green and it's like a clump almost.
Yeah, on the bottom,
Yeah, it doesn't.
it's like cotton candy.
Yeah,
In
exactly.
a calm period,
What
right?
is that?
So that's a green algae, and it's a filamentous green algae. And that one's pretty harmless. You know, it doesn't look great, it's not really fun to kind of walk through, but it's harmless. And usually if you get a windy day, it breaks up and it's gone. But that's a green algae, yeah. That's a great question. Even in really, really clear lakes, you often will see that. So what happens when you have a high nutrient lake? These guys end up being more and more prevalent. And these are the ones, you know, the cyanobacteria or the blue-greens are the ones that cause beach closures and things like that. And it's in the news more and more every year, cyanobacteria warning, you know, swimming's not advised and so forth. And so this is, you end up shifting the community from kind of a balanced community throughout the year to a summertime with blue-green algae as you have more nutrients. So why might we worry about cyanobacteria? They can be toxic to some of the organisms in the lake, to wildlife, to pets. There's lots of stories of dogs drinking out of the lakes that have cyanobacteria blooms and either being very sick or dropping dead. There is some indication that there may be serious human health issues. That's something they're working on over in Dartmouth right now. There are sort of sub-lethal human health things that's similar to swimmer's itch. You can get a rash from it. You can get stomach distress. Some of the worst toxins in cyanobacteria are really strong neurotoxins, and they're really strong liver toxins. So they're nothing to mess with. You really, if you see a floating scum and you know it's cyanobacteria, you probably don't want to go swimming. If you use the lake for drinking, or you just happen to be by it, there's often an odor associated with cyanobacteria that's not pleasant. It's really a problem if it's a water supply. Now obviously aesthetics, swimming, clarity, light penetration, all those things, you can't see your toes because the lake is green. All those things make it something that you would want to worry about. Loss of property value and tax base. So there was a study done up in Maine a number of years ago now where they figured out that a 3-foot drop in water clarity, so if you used to be able to see 6 feet down in the lake, and now you can only see 3, that equated to about a 10 to 15% drop in property values. Now that's important. And if you think about $1 million house that's all of a sudden now only worth $850,000, that's important for the people who own that house. It's also important for the town who taxes that house based on $1 million in value. So it's really, really important. And if you don't live on the lake, you say, well, so what? That's those people. It's like, if their taxes go down, guess whose goes up? Everyone who doesn't live on the lake. I mean, it's not the revenue comes from somewhere. So it's kind of everybody's issue if the lakes go bad. So cyanobacteria like it hot. All you really need to get out of this is at 80 degrees, and these are the cyanobacteria, and they tend to reach their peak the warmer the water is. These are the other groups that I was talking about before. So they like it hot. The warmer the water in the summer, the longer the growing season, the more likely the cyanobacteria are going to be happy. So as I always, as the song goes, you don't know what you've got until it's gone. You can't take clear water for granted. You need to constantly be working to keep it that way. Often when you get to the state where it's turned green, it's a task to get back. And I'm not saying it can't be done, and it's well worth the effort to give it a shot, but it's hard. So where does the phosphorus come from? So watershed activity matters, and I use this graph because these are 4 lakes that I've worked on in New Hampshire. Granite Lake, which I was talking about before the meeting, that's over in Nelson and Stoddard, almost a completely undeveloped watershed, all forested, really good water quality. Webster Lake, a little bit more development. Babuzik Lake, quite a bit more development. And Pearly Lake, a lot of development in a college campus on it. And if you look at the background, I kind of, it's not as important to know what this phosphorus number is. It's sort of, this is a blue lake, and up here, that's a green lake. And there's things in between. And I actually have the Alba Lakes. We put together a slide on that, so I'll show those in a minute. So I'm going to talk a little bit about impervious surfaces. Sounds like a big word, but basically an impervious surface is something that doesn't allow water to go through. A driveway, a rooftop, a deck, a patio, all those things are impervious surfaces. Lawn areas that have a lot of traffic are often impervious. The water doesn't soak down through, it just runs right off. A lot of gravel roads, even though they're gravel, they have a lot of traffic, and most of them do, especially around lakes, they're essentially impervious as well. Not much water soaks down through. So this is a downtown shot, lots of impervious rooftops, roadways, parking lots, all those things. This is a typical storm drain. All this is impervious. Whatever happens out here, whatever anyone drops, goes down that grate right into the nearest water body. no chance for it to soak into the ground. This is where that storm drain comes out, right below the bridge, where nobody can see it. So when it rains, there's a lot of water coming out of there, but nobody sees it. It's like, it just goes away. All good. So what happens with impervious cover? So all you really need to know is sort of this thing. This is very little impervious cover, less than 10% of the watershed. So less than 10% of the water is rooftops and roads. You still have really good water quality. When you get up around 25%, it starts to drop off pretty quickly. And once you get up to like 60 to 100%, like in a downtown urban area, you can expect water quality downstream to be pretty poor. Eroding ditches and trails. Look familiar? These are, typical camp roads during a rainstorm. All that soil has phosphorus attached to it. If the soil runs off, the phosphorus goes with it. This is just a typical storm. This is a gravel road that failed because the crown wasn't properly done. So the water ran down the road rather than off to the side, and it washed out. All that soil went into the lake. And if you think about it, I'll ask people, well, we don't have a problem. Our roads are in pretty good shape. I said, well, how many loads of material did you bring in to fix them this spring? I said, well, it was 6 loads. So what happened to the 6 loads from last year? Oh, it's probably in the lake. So, there's definitely, a maintenance standard to minimize the amount of material you have to bring in. And it saves you money. If the road's built correctly, it won't require as much maintenance. Agriculture, there's a lot of things that happen with agriculture that can potentially impact lakes. Fortunately, a lot of farmers are pretty educated on this and can leave buffers and be careful where they can. And there's programs that work with the farmers if that's an issue. So they can actually get some cost sharing money. Land disturbance, this is the same site before and after a house was built. The house was in the process of being built here. This is the same shoreline. Obviously, a lot of this soil ends up in the lake during the construction process, and afterwards, with it goes a lot of phosphorus. Not natural ground cover, just lawn versus forest. There's about 8 to 12 times more phosphorus in lawn runoff, even without fertilizer, than there is in forest. So you cut down all the trees and grow a lawn, you're going to be adding more phosphorus. And it's even more if you put phosphorus fertilizer on. Septic systems, this is the same picture as before. Obviously, if they're too close to the lake and flood out, whatever goes in the septic system is going to go right into the lake, which is right there. This is a picture of a breakout on somebody's swimming beach. Just below the water level is this big green blob of algae growth, and it's related directly to a failing septic system. Is that really where you want to go swimming? I don't think so. Too many waterfowl equals foul water. I noticed a few of them on Province Lake. There's a few geese, a few ducks. A few waterfowl are certainly natural and desirable. Feeding them, giving them places where they can walk right out of the lake to grassy areas and feed is probably not a great idea, because they're not going to go away if that's the case. And believe me, there's an awful lot of phosphorus in duck and goose droppings. And that's the kind of phosphorus that can immediately become algae. It's really available. It's like crack cocaine for algae. It's like, boom, you give it to them and they take off. So lots of shorefront buffers. This is a place where people were kind of uncontrolled access to the lake, and they trampled all the shorefront vegetation. It all eroded right back to the trees. This had natural tree cover, and that didn't happen. Loss of understory and shorefront buffers, and this is a common thing that we see on lakefronts, where people cut away all of the underbrush underneath the big trees. Like, well, I still have big trees, so I'm good, right? And they rake all the leaves out and all the pine needles and everything for years and years and years. And it turns out that layer is really important to maintain the root structure of the trees. So the trees end up having very, very shallow roots, and there's no web of other roots from small trees and shrubs to tie it all together. So you get a windstorm, and it just peels right up. You know, during this storm, this property, it's like 600 feet of water frontage, lost 18 trees in one storm. All of them about that size. Huge trees, just rolled right over. All of them peeled right up. And this was just a summer thunderstorm. This wasn't any, major thing. So it's important to keep the underbrush, and where you can, leave the leaves. Those are nutrients for the trees. They do a really good job of trapping phosphorus. I realize people, want to have open areas around their cottage, but where you can avoid it, go for it. So loss of soil. I was talking a little bit about how soil has a lot of phosphorus attached to it. This is an aerial view of a lake. And this is the mouth of two streams, and you can see from space sort of where the sediment is dropped out. And all this sediment came down from the upper part of the watershed and dropped into the lake at the mouth of these streams. With that came a lot of phosphorus. So it's much easier to keep nutrients from getting into your lake than to try to get them out later. And if you think about this simple analogy, if you had a handful of sand and you were charged with keeping control of that and disposing of it properly, you could probably do it if it was in your hand. Take that handful of sand and throw it in the middle of a lake and then try to get it back. It's not easy. I mean, it's a lot easier to deal with it when it's still in your hand. Once it's in the lake, it's a lot harder to deal with. So this is my biology slide. So our lakes are not pristine swimming pools, even though, we may think of them that way sometimes. Under the surface, there's a lot of stuff going on. And everybody is somebody else's lunch. Just like in the real world, right? So these bats eat these smaller fish, the minnows, which eat these zooplankton, which eat the algae. Seems, this is a pretty simplified version, but it's pretty close to what happens in a lot of lakes. So if you got a lot of big fish, right? Less and more, this is like the simplest graph ever. You have a lot of big fish. What happens to the little fish? You have less little fish, right? Because these guys eat those guys. So there's not too many of them. So if you have not that many little fish, you have a lot of zooplankton, right? Because these guys aren't around anymore to eat these guys, so these guys do pretty well. Well, why is it important to have zooplankton around? Because the zooplankton eat the algae. And so if you have a lot of these guys around, you have not as much algae. And it's a simple concept. I've done some work, I did some work in grad school and afterwards related to this on a number of different lakes. The relationships hold pretty true across a whole bunch of lakes. If you have way too many nutrients, it's really hard to get enough zooplankton to eat enough algae and not have problems. Yeah?
So when your lake's stocked, do they take into consideration how big the fish, the
Yeah,
ratio
sometimes.
of big to small?
Sometimes. I mean, usually they're putting in fish that are in this category. So usually it works to the, putting more of these fish in.
Yeah.
Usually. But what happens is in a lot of lakes that are, especially historically, people would take the biggest fish out all the time. And you would end up with a population of a lot of fish that weren't that big, We've all seen ponds where all the bass are this big, right? And they might not be big enough to eat these guys. So you end up with an unbalanced fish community that way. So, there are a lot of instances where, I'm not saying, playing around with the biology is, absolutely critical to fixing a problem, but it's important to understand what's going on in the biology, because sometimes that expresses itself in what the lake looks like. And it's important to have a balanced community. That is another talk that I have actually on just on the fish issue and fish. I think the title of the talk that I gave was "What do fish have to do with water quality?" So it's another whole hour on that stuff, which we can get into, but I don't think we'll do that today. Okay, so I'm just going to go through some slides. and my daughter helped me pull together on some of the existing information on the Awa Lakes. I just wanted to get an idea kind of where you guys were at. So I'm just going to go through these real quick. The important thing to note is we kind of looked at sort of what the aquatic community was, just on the basis of that last slide and sort of the way that I like to look at lakes. The ones in brown are non-native things in the lakes. So we have invasive species. This will tell you that there's variable milfoil here. Historically, there are some old accounts from Fish and Game.
Will you read the brown ones? We can't read them.
Oh, I absolutely will.
Thanks.
Yep. And historic fish species, these are from 40, 50 years ago. I have some old records of what was reported to be in these lakes, and current fish species. So, and then I'll just talk really briefly about what's going on with water quality, as much as we know at this point, or as much as I know. I think you guys probably know a little bit more. So phosphorus is relatively stable right now in Balch Pond, and I'm going to have a graph at the end that kind of lays it out next to all the other ponds, so you can see how you're stacking up if you're from Balch Pond. It's listed as mesotrophic, which is kind of in the middle of that green scale. There's kind of the green is eutrophic. I said I wasn't going to use that word, now I'm using it. Green is eutrophic, the middle kind of blue-green is mesotrophic, and then blue is oligotrophic. And those are just like levels of nutrients. It's like low, medium, high. So this is medium nutrients. Now, I guess I'll refer to it that way. So there's variable milfoil in Balch Pond. Historically, there was brown trout thrown in there, and smallmouth bass. And how many of you knew that smallmouth bass are not native to New Hampshire? They've been around for longer than any of us have been here. They were put into Rust Pond in Wolfboro in the 1860s. That was the first place they were put. But they are not native to New Hampshire. They've nativized themselves pretty well, as have largemouth bass, but they're not native. Brown trout are European trout.
Can you talk briefly about the difference between non-native and invasive?
Yeah. Did you listen to Sam Evans Brown's thing yesterday?
I heard that too.
On Outside In? Yeah, I did too. Yeah. I think when I was coming back from the meeting that we were at. Yeah, so non-native, an invasive species is typically a non-native species, but not all non-native species are invasive. So invasive means that it really doesn't have anything to control its population where it's at. And variable milfoil in a lot of lakes falls in that category, right? So once it gets a hold, it takes over large areas, every place that it can be. There are other aquatic plants that do similar things, but there are also a lot of non-native species that might remain as just one or two plants. The only good examples are the ones that you plant in your yards that aren't from around here. A Japanese maple. It's not native, but it's also not invasive. You don't see them all the way through the forest, when that thing drops its seeds. So there's a difference. There's also a difference in sort of how people look at them. So smallmouth bass, I think if people didn't like to catch them and they weren't an important sport fish here, they're really, really aggressive, and they can take over a water body fairly rapidly. There's a lake up in right on the border in northern New Hampshire, Magog Lake. I don't know if you've ever been there. It was a trout lake for many, many years until somebody, about maybe 20 years ago, put smallmouth bass in there. They pretty much took over, and they're working their way up into a couple of trout streams. I mean, in that situation, they're invasive. They might have been invasive when they were put in here in the 1860s, but nobody cared because the fishing was great. There's other species like rock bass that aren't as great for people to catch. And they showed up in Winnipesaukee maybe 10 years ago. In the last 5 years, probably 2 out of every 3 fish that you catch when you're bass fishing are rock bass. They don't get very big. They're really a nuisance. I think you could argue that they're invasive. They're on the way. They're not in Wentworth yet in any great numbers. They may be there in small numbers. We don't know for sure. But they're on their way. They're on the doorstep. They're not native to New Hampshire, but they're in Sunapee, they're in Winnipesaukee, they're in Winnisquam. They're coming soon. So the lesson is, just don't transfer fish. If you catch fish, put them back in the lake that you got them from. I mean, it's really attractive to take, for a kid to have a pail full of fish or a pail full of bait that may or may not have some fish that aren't bait in it. Bring it home, and it's like, oh, I don't need them, I'm going to dump them in the nearest lake. And that's how a lot of these fish get moved around. So brown trout, people like to catch them. Those are European trout. They're not native to here. So those were historically in Bulge Pond. Now there's largemouth bass. I assume there's still smallmouth bass. They weren't reported. Black crappie. That's another one that's not native, but that's showing up in more and more lakes. People do like to catch those, so maybe that's not a bad thing. So Bella Lake, high nutrients, so eutrophic. Phosphorus slightly increasing. Chlorophyll is slightly decreasing, at least in the most recent report. It doesn't necessarily follow. Chlorophyll is kind of how green the lake is. So that might require a little bit more thinking. But there's also variable milfoil. There was no historic reports, but largemouth and smallmouth bass are in that lake. Crappie, spotted bass, none of those are native, but they're there. Great East Lake, there's a lot of commonalities, and I won't, unless there's something really odd, I probably won't talk about them all. Currently, there's rainbow trout in there too, as well as brown trout. So the brown trout are European, rainbow trout are from west of the Mississippi. They're not native here either. Neither the browns nor the rainbows reproduce to any great amount. The browns might a little bit, the rainbows probably not at all. So it's basically the ones that are stocked, stay there, live out their life, are either caught or die of natural causes and go away, but they do have an impact on the food chain. Yeah?
How do these European trout get here?
Yeah, so usually with a state of New Hampshire or state of Maine truck, fish and game truck, stocking truck, and they throw them in. They grow them in the hatchery and throw them in. Yep. It's because people like to catch them. All right. Horn Pond, phosphorus relatively stable. That's kind of a small one, small pond. Oligotrophic, low nutrients. That also has historically had brown trout. Now it has rainbow trout and brown trout. Smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, white perch. That's what I didn't talk about yet. White perch aren't native either. They're a coastal species. They're in almost all of our lakes now, but they're not native.
What are the native fish?
Yeah, there aren't many. There aren't many. Yellow perch, chain pickerel, cusk, which is, you guys know what cusk is? There's freshwater cod. You hardly ever catch those, but they're fall fish, shiners, minnows, horn pout, bullhead, depending on where you're from. Those are native. Lake trout are native in some of the deeper lakes. Brook trout are in some lakes that have good streams around them. I'm trying to think what else. Pumpkin seed sunfish. So the regular sunfish. Bluegills are not. They all look kind of the same. There's a lot of hybridization, but some of the sunfish species are native, some are not. What's that?
Freshwater.
In some lakes. The landlocked salmon, in some lakes. Only the bigger ones, though. They're stocked in a lot of the smaller ones. And that whole fishery for landlocked salmon is almost entirely supported by stocking trucks as well. So hatcheries. Eels, correct. They are a remarkable species, and that you guys all know because we just have talked about it. So I won't talk about eels, because I'm sure the last speaker knew a lot more about them than I do. Lake Ivanhoe, phosphorus relatively stable. Again, another really clear lake. And we don't have any fish reports, so there's not much information on the biology out there that we could find. Level Lake. So smallmouth bass historically were there, white perch. Smelt, that's another species that is a coastal species. They've been planted in a bunch of lakes around. Maybe there was a smelt population in Winnipesaukee and Winnisquam historically, maybe, but not in any of the smaller lakes. They were stocked. Those ones, likely do spawn and have, self-perpetuating populations. Yeah, you had a question?
I noticed on some of these slides in the trophic state that some of them have dates. It looks like there's been an improvement.
Yeah, yeah. So we pulled some older data, and some of them have, according to the information we had, have improved over time. And this is one of them. Yeah.
Right, there's several of them I've noticed the
Yep.
date and the improvement.
Yep. Well, this one kind of went the other way. So it went from low nutrients to kind of low to middle nutrients. This one, so kind of in this one, Great East Lake, for whatever reason, it was tagged as eutrophic back in 1976.
That's what caught my eye.
Yeah, I don't know if that's correct or an erroneous. It's probably an erroneous data point in the data set
Gotcha.
or a different interpretation.
'Cause I was ready to do some research on that.
Yeah. And that's something that you need to look carefully at the data
Oh,
historically.
absolutely.
Way back, some of the phosphorus data from like the 70s, the methods weren't exactly right, and there are some outliers, some data that just isn't right.
Yeah.
I think if you're doing active management on your lakes, kind of the last 10 years is kind of what you really want to look at. Kind of where are you at now?
I was just curious what measures were used, if they would.
Yeah, that would have been based on so the state of New Hampshire always has kind of a bunch of criteria, and it goes into that they'll take phosphorus amounts, they'll take the amount of chlorophyll or how green a lake is, they'll take the aquatic plant community. If there's a lot of aquatic plants, that kind of pushes it towards the nutrient-rich side. So there's a bunch of factors they go into when they do their classification. It's not just based on nutrients.
What about Northern Pike?
Northern Pike,
Never heard you say anything about it.
right, so they're only, at this point, in Spofford Lake, out in western New Hampshire, and in the Connecticut River drainage.
My son caught one like Woonsocket.
A pike, for
Yeah.
sure a pike.
It's huge.
Yeah, not a pickerel.
No.
Wow, that's impressive, because I don't know that that's known to be there.
Okay, well, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised in a lot of ways. I mean, that's a big predator, so that's like a pickerel, pike, muskie. So that's kind of, they look kind of the same, but pike are quite aggressive. I mean, and they're all, where I grew up in upstate New York, there's pike in all the lakes, and they coexist fine with other species. I don't know how they would do in a place where they weren't historically. Who knows ecologically what could happen, but
I'll see if I can
How
parse it.
long, how long does a pickerel grow? How long?
yeah, so a really big one would be like 28 inches or so. That would be a really big one. 5 pounds maybe, 7 pounds. Yeah. So I will say this, in Spofford Lake, I did a little bit of work over there. The way they fish for northern pike, and they're not native there, they were put in there, but the way they fish for them is with lures that look like small trout, like rainbow trout, which the hatchery puts in there. So they throw out these rubber trout, and the pike grab them. So they're pretty voracious predators. So, yikes. Fun to catch, but. So Pine River Pond, I'm nearing the end here, and I can take all kinds of questions. Pine River Pond, kind of in the middle of the range as far as nutrients, kind of the same species as some of the other lakes. Province Lake, historically had smallmouth bass, now it has smallmouth and largemouth. Eutrophic since 1987. There's a lot of nutrients in Province Lake, but not so many that it's irretrievable. This one's over in Maine, so we don't have as much information on the aquatic community. Relatively stable phosphorus, kind of middle of the range. And this sort of lays them all out. And this is just based on last year's data. So don't read too much into it, but it's just sort of, kind of gives you an idea of where they all kind of fall out. I mean, Great East is, I mean, when I saw the historic data, I was like, yeah, wow, because it's pretty low right now. So, it's a good reason to question that. Province is up here. I think we'd like to see it. I think the watershed plan has the goal was 10? Yeah, that's probably reasonable. I mean, I think that's doable.
And some of these flow into each other, right? Great East goes into Horn, that goes into Wilson, that goes
Right.
into blah, blah, blah.
That's right.
So they should be similar, right?
Maybe. I mean, a certain amount of the nutrients that come into one lake settle out, and then it goes on to the next. But for sure, improvements in one lake do translate. If you have good water quality in the lakes above you, chances are, your chances of having good water quality are much improved. So, okay, so we have a problem. What now? So, there's a couple things here that I like to say in almost all the talks I give these days. Everyone has something they can do to improve water quality. Everybody. It can either be helping out at a thing like this, passing the word, what you learned here today to somebody else. It doesn't have to be a physical thing. Supporting a watershed association. But equally as important, each parcel drains somebody, somewhere, and contributes something to water quality. Every parcel. And I'll guarantee that if you went home, walked around your property, there's something there that could be a little better. And I would encourage you to go out when it's raining hard and see where the water's going. It's like, well, here it's going directly down this path into the lake. Is there a chance that I could get that to soak into the ground before it gets to the lake? The water will still get there. It'll go through the ground and get to the lake. But the soil is a great filter. And it'll end up taking a lot of the phosphorus out before it gets to the lake. So, think about that. And go out in the rain. I mean, you learn an awful lot about your own property when you're out in the rain. And it might even be fun. So infiltrate, don't run off. Any chance, and that's sort of the magic word for a lot of this stuff that you could do. Filter the water through the soil, through organic matter, native plants. It's the answer to most stormwater runoff problems. And we usually have problems because we haven't allowed that infiltration that naturally was there to happen anymore. So, simple things, drainage marking, watershed marking, know which watershed you're in. Where's the water from your property go? Which lake? Stenciling these, dump no waste, drains to the lake. We've been working on Wolfboro to put that next to all those storm drains. They keep saying they're going to do it.
I know.
Rain gardens, this is a big positive in downtown Wolfboro. This is the boat launch on Back Bay. Rain gardens don't have to be ugly. Where you made a mound garden before, just make one that's a depression. You can have the same, similar flowers, they don't have to be ugly. And this catches a lot of runoff from a parking lot, soaks it into the ground, and then it gradually makes its way to the lake. Much cleaner. This is just an infiltration structure that we had specified for a big parking lot area, an old car dealership. And this works pretty well. It holds this water. Most of the water ends up draining down rather than running off. Pervious pavement. This is Governor Wentworth's high school. All of these parking spaces are pervious pavement, which means there's holes in it. The water drains down through the pavement rather than running off. The driving areas are pervious, but that all runs into these parking areas and it all goes down, and there's way less runoff than there would have been otherwise. Water quality monitoring, I already talked about how important that is. Just to embarrass my daughter, that's her from years past. Stabilizing ditches. It used to be the practice to clean out the ditches every year and basically take them right down to dirt. And what happens when it rains on bare dirt, they dig deeper and they wash out. Stabilizing with vegetation, hopefully, natural vegetation, so that that slows down the water and that vegetation takes up some of the nutrients, but it also holds the soil there. In places where it's too steep to hold vegetation or too shady, you might want to consider something like that, stone lining. Or at a very minimum grass, and longer grass than you would normally have in your lawn. 4 to 5 inches in the bottom of the ditch. Slows the water down, settles all the soil out before it hits the lake. Waterfowl management, these are just a couple practices. This is a low fence. The geese can't fly this time of year, so if their young ones can't get out of the lake and walk up to the lawn, which is up here, they won't come out. Just a low fence about that high. Keeps them off the property and off the beach. We have one of these fake coyotes. I don't know whether it works. It scares me. This is even better. This is natural vegetation. A goose or a duck won't typically walk out of the water in vegetation higher than its head because it can't see predators. So if you've got a natural buffer that's higher than a duck or a goose's head, you're not going to have a duck or goose problem. Obviously, don't feed them. Because if you feed them, they're coming back. Wetland protection. So this is a tributary to Lake Wentworth. I've been collecting water quality data there for years. It's a big wetland complex. It goes down into Lake Wentworth. This is the phosphorus at the upper end during a rainstorm, really high. This is halfway down through the wetland, much lower. Once you get to the lake, a lot lower. Really, really important. And there's a movement afoot to purchase this property and protect it forever, which is basically 110 acres of this wetland area. Really, really important to protect those areas. We don't have to do anything there. We don't have to build anything. We don't have to do anything. And this is helping water quality enormously, just having that wetland protected. Gravel road maintenance, there's a number of courses locally on gravel roads. I don't know if you guys have sponsored one before. Yeah, I think it's a good idea because all of our lakes have camp roads. They all require maintenance. There's road associations. They're often a really big source of soil and phosphorus to our lakes. And there's a lot of good manuals out there. This one's from Maine. This is from Russ Lanoy up in Conway. He puts together a manual as well. Conservation-minded planning and zoning is basically, put the houses where they do the least harm. It's kind of the watchword there. Away from the streams, away from the lake front. Minimize the number of road areas when you're doing a subdivision, that kind of thing.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
You've been doing this for a long time. How much response are you getting from the towns to do this type of thing, the planning and the zoning?
So in our town, actually...
I mean, we see places that certainly don't.
Yeah, right. I mean, in our town, we've gotten quite a bit of buy-in on that. They'll look at a subdivision and work with the planning department. If the planning department is educated and the Conservation Commission is educated, they'll work with them to come up with an alternative layout that may have less roads, or it may have the houses in a little different configuration with a big area that we want to see protected. So there's, it's an education process for sure, because the standard 5-acre zoning, you end up with a house every 5 acres. Right? And that's the way a lot of towns are, if they have zoning at all.
Most of the lakes are very small lots, because they're almost all of them non-conforming lots.
Right, on the lakefront.
To the lakefront. And then, this is where you get the camps going down.
That's right.
The big houses coming in.
Right.
And there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of consistency, I guess you would say.
Right.
In how this is being done.
Right, and that's kind of where the watershed planning comes in. And I know that some of the Ottawa lakes, and actually a lot of them have watershed planning done. Some of them specific to one lake and some more watershed wide. And that's where the planning comes in, because you can do things like undercurrent zoning. And one of the best illustrations I think you can do is, show what the watershed of a lake would look like undercurrent zoning if everything got built, the way that it's allowed to be built. And it's usually a really frightening picture of the amount of development that could be there and the amount of nutrients that could potentially end up in the lake downstream. So, that's a good exercise to go through to sort of convince people like, oh, maybe we're not okay. So watershed planning, yeah, what a segue. It answers these questions. How much phosphorus can a lake take? What's the tipping point? How much is too much? Which areas are contributing now? Can we fix them? Which ones do we fix first? How much will it cost? Kind of answers all those questions. What solutions work? And that's sort of when, if you have the right people working on the plan, they know what works elsewhere, and they can, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's like, this works really well here. Let's apply it over here. Which sub-watersheds should be protected? Our watershed plan for Lake Wentworth is what led to protecting this property here, which is another wetland that goes into Wentworth. We protected the parcel up above this. And then the property I was just showing you, the big wetland complex. Those are critical parcels. The watershed plan pointed those out, and they came up for sale, and we said, all right, we got to jump on this. And then what's the impact of proposed future projects in the watershed on the lake? And you can start to play some what-if games if you have a watershed plan. What if there's a big development? What if there's a Walmart? What if there's all those things are things that have come up. So, what can be done? We're right near the end here. So fill gaps in the data, keep collecting water quality data, control phosphorus. There's virtually no scenarios where additional phosphorus loading to our lakes will make a lake situation better. I can't think of one, especially for your lakes, that's going to make it better. So, control phosphorus. Set aside resources. Really, really important. Evaluation, monitoring is going to cost money, the protection will cost money, and restoration would cost a whole lot more money. So if you do the first two right, you might not have to do the third, which is great. So what if things go badly? Lake water quality goes downhill, the solutions cost a lot of money, property values might drop on the lake, tax rate drops, I talked about that before, tourists don't show up, local businesses suffer, the residents don't like it here, they move further north or somewhere else where the lakes aren't messed up. So, I always get the question, well, can't we just fix those problems when they come up? We're technologically savvy, we'll come up with something, we'll throw something off the end of our dock and fix it. So the solutions for too many nutrients are not easy, nor are they inexpensive. It may take a very long time to fix, longer than many of us will be alive. If it took us 50 years to mess up a lake, it might take 50 years to get it back. Are we willing to wait that long? I don't know. Success is not guaranteed. There are some situations where you throw everything at a lake, try to fix it, and it just doesn't respond. There's no guarantee you're going to get back to where you were. It's much easier to preserve water quality through thoughtful action now than to fix it later. So, possible future scenarios for your watersheds and lakes. You can keep them as they are and do nothing. You can grow without forethought and hope to react to problems as they come up. I guess I wouldn't go for that one necessarily, because once you have a problem, it's probably starting to get too late to do something about it. Or understand and address existing problems and grow thoughtfully to achieve and maintain high water quality. And growth is not necessarily, lake protection isn't necessarily about closing the door because we already live here. But it's about having a small footprint, fixing problems you already know so that you can actually have a small footprint and develop a little without destroying the resource. What you don't want to do is kind of destroy the reason that you all live on the lake, or live near the lake. With that, I will take some questions. I was shooting for around an hour. I might have gone over. I always say that I could give the same talk for 10 minutes or 4 days and the same set of slides. So, yes?
Were you aware, back in the 50s, and this is a good example of what can happen to like Winnisquam. When I was a kid in the 50s, that lake had a tremendous algae problem.
Yep.
And it was brown.
Yep.
And in the summertime, by July,
Yep.
the top of the water would be absolutely brown. And it really almost destroyed that lake. And I can remember as a kid, one of the things they did was they would drag bags of copper sulfate
Yes.
up and down the lake. just to try and kill.
Yeah, the copper sulfate's a chemical to kill the algae.
Yeah, I mean, that's how desperate it was.
Right.
And it took, and it ruined the fishing. And it took years. I remember for a while after that, it was just full of white perch. And that's all you could catch.
Right.
And it took, but you're talking about years. It took from what was happening then to get that lake back.
That's right.
to
And
where
they
it
had
was.
something that they could actually go after there. So the wastewater from Laconia was dumped into Lake Winnisquam for years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, not good, right? And they finally built the treatment plant in Franklin that took that wastewater, and that was, due to the efforts of the people on Winnisquam and elsewhere, that they needed to deal with this issue. And once they got the wastewater out, it started to come back, and it's a pretty remarkable story of improvement. It's not, there aren't too many lakes that have a pipe going in that you can shut off. I think our lakes, around here, it's more death by 1,000 paper cuts. There's a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there, a little bit there. There's a lot of little projects, and there may not be one huge project that's going to fix everything. So I would encourage you, it's more of a shotgun than a silver bullet. You got to go after a whole bunch of stuff, in most instances.
Another story I had was when I used to live on Lock Lake in Barnston, New Hampshire.
Yep.
And that's an example of a lake, it's a 200-acre lake. It was man-made, it was very shallow, it was only 8 feet deep, and it was dark. That was ideal for the takeover from Milfoil.
Yep.
And it absolutely took over that lake.
Right.
Because Milfoil grows, and then it hits the sunlight, and it lays right over on the top, and it will look
Right.
like a map that you could walk across.
Right.
And what happens with it is that you can have it in one area, and the boats go in, and the boats chop it up, and the wind blows, and it blows it down the other end of the lake, and it sinks, and
Right.
it's just, and so that whole lake was full of milfoil, and still is, and they even tried draining the lake at one time, managed to kill all the fish in the
Yeah.
lake, because
It's pretty tough stuff.
and think that it would freeze in the wintertime. Well, the only thing it did, like I said, was kill the fish. And then they went to chemicals.
Right.
And I don't even think you could use these chemicals in Maine, but you could in New Hampshire. And so they've been doing it for years. Almost every summer, they're putting the chemicals into the water, and you can't go swimming for, 10
Right.
days or something like that. And the chemicals, this milfoil is so resilient that it actually adjusts to the chemicals, and you have to go to a more potent chemical.
Yeah.
And it still doesn't cure the problem.
Right.
And the thing about sucking it up with a hose and that is...
It's lots of work.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I mean,
Yeah.
unless you do, and this is what's so important about the invasive plant people and all the lakes around here that are looking for it, if you can catch it when it just starts,
Right.
that you might have a chance of actually
Keeping it under
harvesting it
control, right.
and maybe even prevent it.
Right, and I always say it's aquatic plant management, not eradication.
Yeah,
You will not be rid of it.
That's right.
And not with the tools that we have right now available to us. You will not be rid of it. You're managing it. Hopefully you can manage it at a low level that, there are certain things that property owners can do to sort of help their situation. And one of them is to not disturb the native plant community in front of their house. The other one, it sounds pretty simple, is milfoil doesn't do that well when it's shaded. If you got trees on the water's front, on the water's edge, and that's shading the water, you're not going to have milfoil growing right up to your shoreline. So, you clear all the trees, have lawn and phosphorus coming in, rip up all the native plants, boy, you're saying, milfoil, come on in. It's an open invitation. So, what usually happens is somebody thinks of a question that they should have asked when they're driving home. I wish I'd asked them. Take down my email, shoot it over to me. I'm more than happy to, Linda knows how to get me. I don't know if I'll see her in a meeting tomorrow, maybe.
Just thought you'd like to know there's large long bass in Ivanhoe.
In Idaho? Yep, I'm not surprised. I mean, I think they're pretty much in all of our lakes now. They're kind of moving north. I mean, they like it a little bit warmer than smallmouth. I think they have a constituency that likes them. I mean, there's bass fishermen all over the place, and I don't know if they move them around. I think most of the kind of hardcore bass fishermen don't move fish around. They're pretty well educated. But you might think, well, it'd be nice to have largemouth in my lake. And they're there.
Well, I'd like to thank Don and all of you for coming. We do have some snacks in the back, some cider donuts and strawberries and tomatoes from Mackenzie's Farm, so please hang around and chat and think of those questions that you might have for Don. Also, I don't know how many of you have been to more than one of these water talks, but if you have ideas of something, a topic that you would like to hear more about, the libraries in Nava are, aiming to do this again, so please let us know if there's things you're curious about or you have any ideas, and hope you'll have, yes, and if you didn't sign in, please do so we can reach out to you with other things that are coming up. So, thanks again, everybody.